Next item on the agenda is the Charter Review Committee recommendations. We're sort of re-reviewing Articles 1, 2, and 3. Had a bit of a long meeting the last time. I thought maybe there was a little more in-depth review required. Mr. Wilbur, how are you?
Hello. Good evening,
Mr. Dunn,
everyone.
if you would, thank you.
Mr. President, Mr. Vice
Good
President.
evening. Good evening.
Council.
If you could state your name for the public.
So I'm Mike Dunn. I'm the chair of the Wicomico County Charter Review Committee. And as a reminder to the council, I'm one of 15 people citizens that you appointed to review the charter as the charter calls for every 10 years.
Okay.
I'll be happy to answer any questions or.
Okay. The council has had quite a bit of time to review, I think, the recommendations that came from the Charter Review Committee. We've also emailed everyone minutes of the meeting to get a better idea of how you came to your conclusions on much of this. The Article 1 was the first one again. There were no real approved motions on that. The first section that the Charter Review Committee came back to the council with was 202A. There was one question on 201B, Mr. Dunn and Mr. Wilbur. And I believe maybe Mr. Hastings may have had some questions on that as well. And that was, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that was that the redistricting? Am I correct?
Yes, just
Okay,
in section 202, looking at both the residency requirement and then the minimum age.
I believe under 201B, there was the districting procedure. Mr. Basehart supplied us a letter, and I think and for you as well, and was talking about how I think he had some pretty good recommendations.
So the Charter Review Committee, because as you know, there's a Redistricting Commission that just did its work also. So the Charter Review Committee looked at the current structure of the council, which is, as you know, 5 districts and then 2 at-large members. Mr. Basehart came and presented his thoughts on that matter. The Charter Review Committee looked at it. It's one of the recommendations. Now, we didn't recommend a charter change, but as well as the charter recommendations, we had some bullet points that we wanted you all to kind of look at perhaps over time. And that was one of the questions was when, we've been around as a functioning government for a long time. The county executive form of government came into play 16 years ago. And so we have stuck with the 5 districts and the 2 at-large members. And our only thought or question was, should that be something that the council looks at is that still the best way to serve the citizens of Wicomico County? Among the suggestions was doing 7 districts of equal size, which perhaps might lead to another, if you will, minority district that might be carved out. There were questions to kind of make sure that representation of the minority communities were, this might help with that. So we didn't make a recommendation other than simply pointing it out as something that perhaps should be looked into, maybe by a citizens group or what have you, separate from what Mr. Basehart is talking about. So this was just kind of a function of government and how it works. And since we're looking at it, why not perhaps look at that question also?
I think part of it as well was, with what we have in our charter, it just talks about the fact that there'll be a redistricting committee appointed. It does not really, I don't think it really establishes how many members there are.
Right.
It doesn't say it doesn't address anything as far as party affiliation, any of this whatsoever. And this was a very, I think, broad letter in trying to address all those issues. What was your take, Mr. Welber? I mean, how would we assimilate all that down into,
Essentially, as you say, it's a
An
broad
amendment.
brush right now.
Right.
You establish a commission. If you wanted to get more specific about that commission, then it could go in the charter.
I thought that was set up by the state several years ago. I know the minority district was, but wasn't it set up by the state that we'd have five and two? Wasn't that, was legislation passed at some point in time
State? No, I don't believe so.
about the amount of council
I'd have to
people?
check on that, but that's,
I think outside of just the number of districts, what Dr. Basart was talking about was the commission that we put together was somewhat ad hoc, where we just had a group of individuals who we appointed to serve. But the number of members was not defined in the charter. It was, I think, something that we did because that's the way we did it the year before. Or, I mean, the few years back, the last time.
And the Redistricting Commission, as you know, is a function of the census every 10 years, right? It's going on nationally and here within the county, too. So that's the Redistricting Commission kind of looks at that question. What we were sort of just talking about was function of government question. Are we, as currently constructed, is that the best way moving forward? Or just do 5 total districts, or keep the current 5 and 2. Our point was that we thought it was worth talking about. That's all. Nothing more, nothing less.
You know, and with that said, I just think that's where we sort of leave it, because I think it's a good point, quote, to be raised, but at the same time with, what we got 20, what was your final number, 20-some recommendations that we're going to have to get real serious about.
So we're clear. We're not asking you to
recommending-
think
right.
about that as a charter change. We're saying
Which I realize, yeah.
put that aside and perhaps at a later date,
Right.
sometime in a reasonable period of time, look at that
I
question.
think what
Same-
Bill's
same-
saying is we got enough
That's
other
it,
stuff to
absolutely.
worry about. right?
And we concur, Mr. Holloway. Yes,
right.
sir.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, right. I'm saying
That's
we
right.
got enough on our plate
We
for the
can-
moment.
That's right.
So, yeah,
But again, I would
keep it on our radar.
I would be remiss if I didn't say to the council that outside of the recommendations, as important to the commission, to the Charter Review Committee, were these bullet point recommendations that kind of have to do with, again, function of government. Not now, why you have to figure out which and how of these 24, but please don't let these, to quote Mr. Pasota, go sit on a shelf. We strongly thought that some of these bullet point recommendations are things that should be looked at some point in time.
Sure. And my reason for bringing it up had nothing to do with the number of districts or how we handle that. This was specifically on the commission itself. The fact that in the charter now, it does not define how many commission members we have, whether or not we have to have that. It doesn't say whether or not they have to be registered voters or whether they have to live in Wicomico County. So I'm just putting that out on the table for the council members to, opine on. Yes, Josh.
Just as we briefly mentioned the Redistricting Commission and Dr. Basehart's recommendations, I would love to see the council. Dr. Basehart had requested that this maybe go into our code, and I don't know if that would, I guess it'd have to go into our charter. But I would love to see something more permanent where, based off of what Governor Hogan had put together for a redistricting commission specific to that. And not that we have to discuss that now, but just as we're mentioning this, as is briefly mentioned, I would love to see a 9-member commission, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, 3 independents, that was put together. And Dr. Basehart actually did have some good recommendations. He did his doctorate, studies on the reapportionment, and that's actually how he got his education. So I would love that we would follow that and move forward in that direction and have it established as a specific number of people to try to prevent future partisanship or anything like that.
And probably residents of Wicomico County, registered voters or not?
Yes.
What was the purpose of having them as registered voters, just to serve on the committee?
To be actively engaged and at least to.
Okay, Ms. Baskin.
I hear what you're saying. I have concerns of all the unintended consequences when we change something that worked well, the Redistricting Commission worked well, they came back with good recommendations, and I think when we start changing things that aren't broken, what's the cascade effect going to happen? So just, it hasn't been an issue in the past, so I don't know if it's something we really need to hone in on.
Does that have to go into charter, or can we do that outside of this process to?
If you want to define the makeup of the redistricting commission, that can go right here in the charter, yeah.
But it doesn't have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'd rather not.
Right.
Yeah, he's right. If you're gonna define it and make it obligatory, it has to go into charter. But you can just decide, set your own rules up for the next time you have a commission.
It's like we've always done.
Yeah.
I think it's just a matter of whether or not we would, it was important to maybe codify what we had, the fact that, yes, there'd be 9 members, or there'd be 11 members, whether or not they would be Wicomico County residents or not, because at the time, it seems very arbitrary.
I agree, and if you're gonna do that and make it something that is a requirement, it has to go in the charter. Although, that's no short fault, they could just pass a legislative bill, then it can be changed by the next council, so.
Yeah, we do that for the Compensation Allowance Commission. I believe it's mentioned in the charter that we're required to have that commission, but then the code actually says,
Defines it.
right.
It's going to take
I think
legislation.
you could do that, but it'd be subject to
Whether
change
it's-
by the next charter, by the next council.
So it could be done by code?
Charter or code.
Code's a lot easier.
Yep.
You know, if
It's a legislative act by all of you.
Okay.
If we remember when we were going through this, and you're talking about 9 members or 11 members, if you remember when we were going through this, the reason we had so many members is because the last charter review committee prior to this one, there was an attendance issue. So that's why we had so many this time, because they were afraid they would end up with not enough people, coming in to give their views and
Yeah.
to.
Representing our team of 15, we had great attendance.
Right,
you know,
right. So
absolutely.
this year you had a lot of people and
Yep.
everybody showed up.
That's right.
A few years ago, you didn't have as many people and hardly anybody showed up.
I will say, for what it's worth, as the chair, having 15 people, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of looking to your left and a lot of looking to your right. So, 15, I get completely why, understand and support that. But maybe 10 years from now, God knows where any of us might be. But 15 people, that's a big committee. So
Too many.
just keep that in.
Would you consider it working?
Yeah, well, it worked, no question, no question. But I'm, sometimes too big is too big. And so, but yeah, we had a great committee, and your point is absolutely well taken.
The next item that we have, of course, is 202A. And I know, Michael, that your committee had recommended to add the residency requirement for the county council to be 2 years for Wicomico County, in Wicomico County, and then a residency within the district for 1 year, and a minimum age of 25. And, in reviewing, and Mrs. Hurley supplies with a lot of information as well, it's across the board if you look at all the other counties throughout the state. I didn't know if the council had any opinions on.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. When it said a residency within the district for 1 year, that creates a problem if there's redistricting.
Yes.
And it takes somebody out of the district that they've, Larry's a good example. You live close to the line.
That's right.
Redistricting could have moved him into another district with a swoop of a pen, and, he would have to step out for a year or 4 years.
Term.
4 years, a term.
Term.
So I think that's probably an issue there. That would be my take on that part.
Okay, yeah, and that is a good point.
Can I just make a comment, because I was on that committee?
Well, yes, if you're on the committee, Michael, you don't have an objection, right?
I wasn't on the
She's
charter
not on the
council
committee.
redistricting.
This is your meeting.
Yes, yes.
All I was going to say.
You need to use the mic, though. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry.
All I was going to say is, like, in reference to, with Councilman Dodd, we were told not to move anyone, or not to, to not shift it at all. So those lines couldn't even be touched, you know what I mean? So I don't think that would have been an issue. I don't know how it's written there, but we were given strict instruction to not move anyone, including even school board members, out of their district. So just something to consider.
Okay.
But it could happen the next time.
It could.
Yeah, I think the time restraint made an exception, certainly. Well, I think you make a good point, Joe. So I think we'll make a note, if we could, Mrs. Hurley, that that's something we want to review as to whether or not the residency of just 1 year for the district, we may strike that.
So.
And if you strike that, you're striking the, I think you end up striking the 2 years,
Why would,
or
why
it
would
could
you,
be reduced.
why would you strike to 2
Well, not
years?
necessarily, but I'm not sure, I don't know, I'm not sure I'd go 2 years. I mean, I think 1 would be fine. I mean, I don't want to get into horse trading on the number of the time. I mean, but, and Mike, I'd ask you all, I mean, and I'm sure you probably bounced around different time frames. I guess end of the day, how'd you settle on 2?
Yeah, the thought, and again, I'm just the chair, so I'm reporting out how this thought, the path of the committee on this question, just kind of had to do with understanding of the county. And it was simply, if you've lived here for a minimum of 2 years, by default, you might know a little bit more than someone who has just moved to the county within 6 months or a year. So while arbitrary, it had to do with kind of requirements. And same thing with the age, again. It had to do with the thought process that, you know, at a certain level, we get a little bit more mature, and maybe that's a better time to take up one of these seats. But that's where our thought process was on the time frame.
I think somebody made an offhand comment that it takes 6 months to find a bathroom.
Yeah,
Something
sure,
like that, yeah.
sure. Yeah. So that's kind of where Mr. McCain, that's where we came from, was just a thought that living in the county for 2 years might just be a good thing to step onto the seats that you guys are in.
But I don't have an issue with the time in residency as long as it doesn't affect an incumbent. I wonder if there's legislation out there that would protect an incumbent because you could see an issue in the future.
In what way?
To make sure that the lines aren't moved, because that could be intentional.
You mean as far as 1 year in the district?
Right.
Yeah. I'm kind of okay. Josh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I feel like the current law is sufficient, and I don't think we need to take anything from 202A, any of the recommendations. I think we could skip all of them and keep the laws. We got 29 recommendations to go. That's a lot of ballot items, so I'd say personally, I think we should just kill that one, but I defer to the greater wisdom.
Okay. We'll note that, Josh. We'll note that. I wasn't sure about the age requirement of 25 because I don't think Mr. Hastings is 25. Are you?
I just made it, yeah.
I mean, I would say 21. If you're old enough to, gosh, 21, everybody's old enough to do everything and anything. Sure. And lead up to the voters decide if they're too immature to run. So.
And if I may, you know,
Yes.
what Mr. Hastings just said, that's kind of how the Charter Review Committee hoped this would play out. We were under no illusion or delusion that all 24 things would be put forward. All we were asking for, which is what's happening right now, is a discussion, and we appreciate that. Whether you agree with what we've recommended or don't, that the recommendations are taken seriously, and we appreciate that.
Thank you. Any other comments before we move on? Okay, the next item on the...
Mr.
Yes,
President,
yes.
so is there a consensus to completely strike all those recommendations in 202A?
Well, I think what we're trying to do now is just get a list of things we know we will have to revisit. I'd like to move through all of these and get and do that, and then we can sit down and have a final work session and say, okay, 202A, Josh wants to kill it, Ernie doesn't, and then we'll go from there if that's okay.
I agree.
My only comment with that is if there's something we have consensus on, I mean, let's
do it.
do it. Yeah, because if not, we're just going to come back.
Yeah.
We're going to go through all these, and then we're going to come back and go through all these.
That's a good point.
So-
Then that's
That's
a
what
very
we did for 9 months, Mr. McCain, to your point.
Yeah.
No,
So-
you're
I mean, there's 3 parts to this
It-
one, so I'm fine revisiting, keeping this one on our quote, because we've had different
Yeah.
comments on it, so I'm fine with that. But it might be others that, yeah, we do have a quote consensus on.
So, well, we can kill one right there. I mean, does anyone want to kill this entirely as a?
But what's 202 say now?
There is no age.
202A says this, qualified voter, no person shall be eligible for election to the office of the member of the county council or hold such office unless he is a qualified voter of the county. That's it.
Basically, you got to be a registered voter.
There's
right?
no age,
18 years
there's no
old and
residency requirement.
registered voter.
Yeah, kind of, it's lacking.
Isn't that 18 and 6 months residency? Qualified voter?
Is that in another section? Is there another
No, I
section?
mean, that's what a qualified voter is.
18?
And
I
6
think
months.
that's right.
The age to vote.
And I think it's only 6 months residence. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
So again, A seems a little vague, so maybe we'll
We'll come back to it.
yeah. So I guess maybe we would override Mr. Hastings' recommendation to kill it entirely, right? But we need a majority consensus.
We can have time to think about it.
Okay, we'll keep it on, and Joshua, we'll make a note that
Kill it
you
later.
want to kill it. That's fine. That's fine.
We'll kill it the next time, right?
Next item is 202D, and that was to include felony with moral turpitude. Currently, it just says if a member of the county council ceases to be a qualified voter, the councilor is convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude. So they were suggesting to make it a felony involving moral turpitude. Mr. Wilbur, because of the fact we know we have so many recommendations, would this be one where it wouldn't make that much of a difference publicly? I mean, you know,
This is probably one of the more minor recommendations, if I were to rank them.
What he said.
yeah, okay. So this is something that we could pass on possibly, council? What's your take on this? Instead of saying convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude, it's saying to change it to a felony with moral turpitude. Not crime, but felony. Yes.
I'd say it's probably less of an issue. I guess the question at hand for me, there's a very real example that happened a month and a half ago in Cambridge with the mayor, where this individual is now going to be going for office, but it was very public, national, actually made national news. So in a situation like that, I guess if what we're trying to get at here is that the forgery of office, we're putting it at a high bar, right? The current law is a high bar that they have to be convicted of a crime. But I guess that could be something as minor as
What I would say is crime could be a
Right.
misdemeanor.
Exactly.
Or a felony, and the felony word was the higher bar that the committee went with.
But wasn't the key word convicted? Is the Cambridge mayor was not convicted yet.
right, but did leave office because of this. Now, getting at the high bar, I think that's the question, right? I think the felony makes sense. It's a higher bar, but whether or not that's the item that we choose to put on the ballot, that's a different question, I think.
It's a question whether you want to keep it as a misdemeanor and a felony or just a felony. Personally, I don't, if it's moral turpitude, it's moral turpitude. If you feel like you want to act, you want to act. I don't see the need to make it get to the level of a felony. I'm fine where it is right now.
If I could step.
Yes.
If it's done the way I think they've recommended, then it would have to be a felony. There's no, a lot of states, Virginia's one, they refer to it as a crime, a felony or a crime of moral turpitude. So you could have a felony that's, moral turpitude is lying, cheating, stealing. You may not want somebody on the council that's convicted of a misdemeanor of lying, cheating, stealing.
Well, I think
Felony, you may want them off even though it's not of that gender,
I think as an elected official, the higher the bar, the better. And moving it to a felony, and keeping it where it is, sets a pretty high bar that the
Right,
members
that's
of
what I'm saying. So I would say, I'm saying a lot of states say a felony or a crime of moral turpitude.
Yep, that was actually kind of,
This, but then, because you could have a felony that's not a crime of moral turpitude, so they would just stay on they would be okay.
yeah, I was kind of surprised it said felony with moral, I kind of thought it would have said felony or
Yeah, that's my point. That's exactly.
moral turpitude, yeah.
It's like what Andy's saying, and I agree with, you can have it, it's a felony, any felony, or a crime of moral turpitude, which could be a misdemeanor or a felony. Like theft of less than $100 or theft greater than $100. I think that's John's point.
Oh, so what Mr. McCain is saying is that it should say, is convicted of a felony or a crime involving moral turpitude. Is that kind of what you're suggesting as well?
That's what Andy's saying.
All right, okay, all right.
You know, this doesn't have anything, I mean, this isn't included in this, but the interesting part about when you read this, a felony, you know, somebody that could commit a felony, it could take them 2 years to get to court. So they would be able to serve until they're convicted. So, I mean, I don't know what we could do to change that, but, you know, that could happen in the executive side or the county council side, as far as that goes. We're dealing with the county council now, but I don't know, is there anything that could be done to, well, until they're convicted, there's nothing you can do, right? That's right, yeah.
I'm aware of a situation where there was a conviction and the person had to step out of the office, but then on appeal, that was reversed and came back into office. So,
Yeah.
lay out.
Josh?
So just to be clear, if someone is a felon, can a felon in Maryland vote?
Yes.
Hold office.
A felon in Maryland can hold office.
That's a good question. All right, well, 202D, it looks like as of right now, there's interest, I guess, maybe to keep it around, to look at the change for the better. So we're going to add this, and we are going to be repeating, I'm sorry, but unless anyone does want to take a vote today to sort through exactly the wording.
We might get to one with consensus, but we got 22 more to go.
Next
I
one
got
is.
faith.
Next one is section 202, and they wanted to add the language "at the time of election." That is in the heading of 202, where it says qualifications, right?
It has to do with the age, so that was the discussion. If you file and you're 24, but by the time of the election, you're 25. So if you're going to strike 202A, then 202
Is irrelevant.
is irrelevant, correct?
Okay, but if we do decide to make a decision on 202A, the recommendation is to change
That's right.
the headlining title of that section 202 to qualifications
Yep.
at the time of election.
File as a 24-year-old, as example, if you go down this road. But as long as you're 25 by the time of the election, then you're good, was our thought process.
Okay, all right. Now, in that section, well, we'll go to A and B first. I know in C there was nothing recommended by the committee, but 202C was a question that the council had in regarding to teachers having the right to run for the county council. I think Josh Hastings had brought that up earlier, and Mr. Wilbur, I think you were going to review that with the Attorney General, or the Attorney General's office. That's 202C, but the first two on the items in front of us right now are 205A and B. To eliminate unless there's a special exception. Okay, so 205 A and B all ties into wanting to strike section 206, correct?
And all having to do with filling of vacancies, should a vacancy occur.
Okay. So that you're familiar, when you go to 206, 206 is referencing to how we would hold a special election to fill a vacancy for the council. If I remember correctly, it says here that any person appointed more than 30 days prior to the filing deadline for the primary of an election shall serve until the first Tuesday in December, and a special election shall be held contemporaneously with the primary in general. So I believe that the reason that the council initially chose to take this position was because there was some concern among council members that if someone is appointed after, let's say, the first year, like in the perfect example, Mark Kilmer went to Idaho and Councilwoman Ackley was appointed. Ironically, I think it was Mr. Councilman Kilmer who was concerned of the fact that if you're appointed a year after that office was voted it for, well, then you have someone who's spending 3 years on the county council, and that individual was never elected. So you have an appointed person. So he felt at the time that there should be something in here that requires a special election so that the people can have the individual in office who they choose to have in office, as opposed to an appointed person sitting out for the entire 3 years. Correct?
I can't speak to what Mr. Kilmer
Right,
taught,
right.
but our thought was, and again, Ms. Zackley was kind enough to come and just share her experiences, as all of you had the opportunity to do, and many of you did, and we thank you, in her circumstance. And she was not there saying, woe is me. She was simply representing that here was a very recent example of, an election, exactly like you just described, Mr. Cannon. And so an appointment, then an election not long thereafter, and then another election. So our thrust, the gist of our discussion was, if you appoint them, just let them ride out the term. Whether the term is 3 years and 9 months or 9 months, just let the person that the council appoints ride out that term. Because there are costs involved with rolling out voting machines, et cetera. So that's all. That's where we were. Mm-hmm. And Mrs. Ackley was kind enough to just share her example and raise it as a point. And so we had really good discussion about it.
Okay.
And I think there's something to be said how this is done statewide. I mean, it was state officials that leave office, they're appointed to the end of the term. Is this do I think this is our top priority of charter changes? No, but I definitely think it's something we should look at. And not just for council members, but also for school board members, because we had a very similar instance with the school board member.
I think this is kind of a priority because over the past 15 or 20 years, we've lost a lot of council members one way or the other, from moving away or passing away or whatever. So
7 council members in
Right.
4-year terms, we're going to have.
and the age of all of us.
Not everybody's 25, right, Ms. Fowler?
It's like you say, that could have happened. It could have been a lot worse than what it turned out. Time wise, what I'm saying. What would that have had to been? You'd had to have 1 year left before you wouldn't have had to run, or 2 years. If due to the appointment, I don't want.
I would have had,
Is that 30 days, Mr. Wilbur?
Looking.
shoot,
Says within, well, let's see, that was to be 45 days after the vacancy occurs.
More than 30 days
Yeah.
prior to the following.
There it is, yeah. The vacancy shall be filled within 30 days by the governor, who shall appoint the persons to fill such vacancies.
Was that saying that
Essentially,
this scenario would come into play until, unless it was 30 days prior to the next election?
yeah, it says 30 days prior to the filing deadline for the primary of
Filing
an
deadline.
election for President of the United States.
Okay.
There it is.
I think we need to address that. Put that in.
Okay. What is in right now is to require the election. That's in right now. What's being suggested by the committee is to eliminate that and let the person appointed stay the duration of the term.
That's what I think we should do.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah. Let the
It
person
makes
stay.
it difficult to get appointed for several months, run for election, and then in 2 years have to run for reelection.
That was that scenario.
And-
It's 2 elections in a
That's right.
term.
And Mr. Dodd, to your point also, it's, as we all know, it's difficult enough to find people who are willing to
yeah.
sit in one of those 7 seats. So if the council thinks that that person that they choose is good enough to sit there for 6 months, then that person should be good enough to sit there for whatever, 3 years and 6 months. So
And with that said, when we're talking about the importance of that, that leads into the other part of this, where the suggestion that it shall say, we may select from those recommendations, not shall select from those recommendations. We have, getting back to the example, if we've got 12 nominees, for example, oh, there could be, you could have 6 great candidates on there. So we shouldn't be limited, at the end of the day, we want to be able, among the 7, or if someone leaves, the 6 or whatever's left, be able to discuss, someone that we think should be eligible,
Okay, now, hold that thought, okay?
Okay.
Because what we've decided on, we have a decision, is that we go with the recommendation of amending Section 205 and eliminating Section 206. Okay, that's what we came to the conclusion on. Now, what Bill is suggesting also is in 205, where it says that the county council, prior to the expiration of the term, therefore shall be filled by a qualified person, and that they,
well, that, shall be a qualified person. I'm not sure where we put that. And Mr. Wilbur, you might have to help us there, where we put that may, because we have to pick right now, we got to pick from the 4 recommendations.
From the central.
Shall.
From
well,
the central.
that is the section.
Is
It
that-
says,
yeah.
I didn't read it all, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It says, therefore shall be filled by a qualified person, after vacancy by the county council by election, by majority vote of the remaining members thereof, from a list of 4 persons for each vacancy submitted to the said council in writing by the local, state, central committee of the political party. So that shall references the fact that it's a run-on sentence.
Yeah.
But that shall says that we shall make our decision from the list of the state central committee.
And Mr. President, we did talk that, Mr. McCain, this was discussed. It just didn't rise to the level of adding that language, which is not to say that there's not merit to it. It's simply, going down the rabbit holes, there's a whole bunch of rabbit holes, and so this one just didn't rise to that level, but it certainly seems reasonable what's being suggested, and many members of the Charter Review Committee thought it to be a reasonable suggestion.
At the end of the day, I think it's a pretty simple change that, we may very much stick to just what's, 4 recommended, but if, like I say, if there's a case where there's more, end of the day, we don't want to be boxed into a certain situation.
Any comments?
Was there any other conversation around, and this might be sidetracking it if this is in a later section, but how the appointment process works as far as, should it be the central committee, should it be an open interviews, should it be from one party?
Yeah, the only real part that, and Laura or Paul help me out, it really had to do with because there are an increasing number of unaffiliated voters, i.e. not Republican or not Democrat. What the committee recognized is that in 2022, again, there's 7 of you here, let's pretend 1 of you is an unaffiliated voter. Right now, the charter only addresses if you're a Republican or a Democrat, because there are Democratic state central committees and Republican state central committees. So we were saying, let's use you, Mrs. Ackley, for the purposes of this. If you're an unaffiliated, i.e. independent, and your term in the council ends, we think it's appropriate to add an unaffiliated independent replacement for you, as opposed to turning to the 3 Republicans, the 3 Democrats, or what have you. So that's kind of where we are. We didn't have any really deep dive discussions where you were leading. We were just kind of concentrating on that rise of unaffiliated voters, and should one get elected, he or she should be replaced by an unaffiliated voter as well. So that's where we were.
Thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Paul or Laura.
No, that's where the committee was. Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with Councilman McCain. I think that there should be a may in there instead of a shall, because the shall sort of can box you into a corner, very close to the corner we were boxed in when we were trying to appoint a county executive, same thing. So I think may would give the council more flexibility. If we did may, would we have to make mention of an independent? Because may means that we could pull independents when they're independents. Or would you want to codify it so it says independent in there?
Have to plead, Paul?
Well, I think
How might we?
the thought of the committee was, if there was an unaffiliated member who left, that would be replaced by an unaffiliated person.
Okay, so then the idea is to replace shall with may, and at the same time, put mention in there of unaffiliated.
Yeah.
Okay?
Can I just read one thing?
Yes.
I think the purpose of the, having the central committees do that was to balance out, you have a member of a party leaving, coming on, and they had the list so that the remaining members, if they all happen to be a majority of one party, couldn't just pick somebody else and continue to stack that party. By making it May, you're back to being able to do that again. I'm not suggesting that it should be done by party, but if it is,
I'm not suggesting it goes outside of the party. I'm not suggesting that at all.
yeah, but if the central committee is going to put up 4 from their party, you're going to dip in and pick somebody else from that party?
Isn't there another section, Mr. Wilbur, that states that it has to be from the same party?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
We're
I
covered.
realize that.
Right.
Right.
But we're just saying that it doesn't lock you into having to take that decision from
Right.
your
If
central.
we think there's 6 great candidates, and they give us 4, but there's 2 others that we'd like to, interview as well, we want to be able to interview.
Right, and I'm not trying to argue about
That's
that.
all
What
I'm
I'm saying is, you can then pick, and there's a phrase called a rhino, you can just decide you're going to pick somebody who is not actually, they might have the R or the D after a name, but since the central committee said, we're not picking that person, they're not really with us. But then the opponents on the
We
council
pick 'em,
could pick them.
so
Well, we're still picking them.
We're still
You
picking.
got 4.
Well, that's true.
You got 4
Yeah, that's
Democrats
right.
and 4 Republicans still picking them.
But in one way,
I just point that out.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. Yeah. I mean, I think there were some other previous council members who talked about parties, and when you start getting into appointing people, you can see the party discrepancy, so.
but to Bill's statement, if they sent us 4 and we didn't agree on any, or the council didn't agree on any of those 4, they can always say, okay, you sent us 4, we don't want either one of them, you need to go back to the table
4 more.
4 more. So you could do that instead of changing all this up. I mean, that's the simple way to do it.
Right, and that's what we did on that last appointment process.
So, I mean, instead of changing things up, you just say, okay, you sent us these 4, that didn't suit, so send us 2 more or 4 more or whatever.
This last
That's why we
appointment,
need the May in there. We could do that if we have May. Shall they give us 4? We got to pick from those 4. We got to pick one of them.
It doesn't say we have to pick one.
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't.
Shall means,
Well, this says,
They have to send them. It says they have to send them. It doesn't say we have to pick them.
I thought there was somebody, I
shall
thought they
said we
did
got to
change
pick
it.
from the, shall is shall. That's my whole point. This comes up in court.
Yeah.
I'm sure that Andy.
It's from a list of 4. Yeah.
Shall and may comes up in court all the time. At the end of the day, may's your better, if you want the flexibility, you want may.
and you can
Just
still ask,
shall pick from the 4.
you can still ask the central committee to come back with 4 more. You can still do that. But the option is if it really gets up against a deadline and we're not satisfied with those choices, then at least we have some alternatives. And the decision is still with the council. It doesn't take away the decision from the council.
We may never utilize it. At least we had that, we might not even hit it.
A may or a shall.
Just on that, we definitely do need to add the unaffiliated. I think we're seeing unaffiliated folks get elected across the country. I think within the next 10 years, we'll have somebody elected who's unaffiliated, if not third party. So we certainly have to have a process there.
Okay? All right, we'll move on. We'll probably review that again. I can say I'm okay. I've already said before, I think that the may is important. And I do agree with Josh that unaffiliated has to be recognized at some extent. Anyone else, any other opinions on that? Does anyone disagree with that?
By the way, they make up 26% of our electorate, so that's
Okay.
pretty fair.
So is everyone okay with that?
I'm good.
Anybody disagree with that? All right, then we have that decision made. 206, I believe we said, what did we say? I'm confused now. We agreed that we're going to strike 206. Okay. So we have 205 and 206 resolved, in addition to the qualifier on may as opposed to shall.
Is there ever a case, though, we would need a special election?
Saying no.
I know we're
That's my
saying that, yeah,
understanding.
I'm just trying to think, is there something we're not thinking of, or where you may have to do a special election?
A little history there.
talking about-
Back in the 40s,
I just said, we're talking about a council vacancy, that's it.
Back in the early 40s, they had, I think, 3 members removed for more moral turpitude. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, it's a tough one.
And the governor replaced them. So the governor can always step in.
And you were only 19 at the time, that's why you
Yeah,
didn't
that's
get
right.
to
Yeah, I
apply.
remember
Yes,
that,
sir.
yeah.
Well, that's paragraph B, 205B. If more than 3 vacancies occur,
And that's where it's addressed.
that's where the governor comes in.
Okay.
Okay, so we are out of section 200, that's great. We're out of Article 2, we're into Article 3. This is 312, 313, referencing, this is all in your court, Mr. Wilbur.
Right, this is Lindsay Rader territory here.
And, Mr. President, that's exactly what we said too. This is in your court and in Mr.
Whatever he says.
Exactly.
Right, so Lindsay Rader had made recommendations that she thought would improve the bond sale process and the subsequent dealing. In this case, in Section 312, she suggested that language be added on the third line up from the bottom, where it says any part of any public local law authorizing, and she wanted to add, or reallocating to projects not included in the original authorizing public local law proceeds of any bonds, certificates of indebtedness, just to give the county more flexibility. This is moving, if you choose. Sometimes you have bond issues where you have, you don't spend all the money and you want to reallocate it to another project. The authorization is clear with her language.
Good with that.
Whatever she wants, I'm good with.
Yeah, I mean, she's bond counsel and she's making recommendations that she believes are in the best interest of the county's bond process.
That's come up before. I mean, we've had that issue.
Oh, yes, yes.
So, I mean, I like that language.
In section 313, limitation on bond issues, she suggested 2 alternatives. The idea behind that was the terms of bonds used to be 30 years, but now the term is 40 years. So she's suggested that we put that degree of authority into the council to approve bond issues up to 40 years. And she offered 2 alternatives. They're not highly different from each other. If I had my choice, I think I would choose the second one, that in the language that she would add is, except that the last installment of this series of any such bonds, certificates of indebtedness, notes, or other obligations issued to the federal government or the state of Maryland or any department, agency, or other instrumentality of either the federal government or the state of Maryland shall become due not later than 40 years after the date of issuance. I think that one's a little more defined than her first one, which was, or by any official of the county to which the county council has delegated authority to make any such final determination to be paid on up to 40 years term.
Can you read the first line of the first one you read again?
First line, okay. I'll read the whole section. Provided, however, that the last installment of the series shall become due not later than 30 years after the date of issuance, except that the last installment of the series of any such bonds, certificates of indebtedness, notes, or other obligations issued to the federal government or the state of Maryland or any department, agency, or other instrumentality of either the federal government or the state of Maryland shall become due not later than 40 years after the date of issuance. So for those 2 categories, to bonds to the federal government or the state of Maryland, you could go up to 40 years. Others would have to be 30 years, say bonds that would be sold to banks.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it would fall in that category, but what if the county borrowed money versus a bond issuance, such as a USDA loan? Does that fall into this category, or is that, you know where I'm going with that? I mean,
Yeah, it's,
Because right now, USDA loans, they're doing 40-year notes.
I think
and
that's
a lot of
covered.
governments are doing that.
I think that's covered by, it says bonds, certificates of indebtedness, notes, or other obligations. So I think that's
So, I
broad
mean,
enough to
yeah,
catch
so
that.
just the other obligation will capture, okay.
Yep.
I just want to make sure, we're not,
I
we're going to do a USDA loan, also we can't do it.
Yeah.
I have a problem with extending our loans. This is like they lend money now on cars longer than the cars last. For what are we going to borrow money for that's going to last 40 years? Our schools don't hardly last that long
Oh,
anymore.
it's a generational opportunity. You got USDA doing 2% fixed rate.
I
40-year
understand.
notes.
I understand what it's all about, but
You don't walk away from,
a 40-year loan.
you want that option on the table.
There's more tools in the toolbox.
We'll say that's Lindsay Rader's recommendation.
I understand who recommended it, but the closer you pay things off, the better off you are. That's just.
That's not
That's just-
necessarily true. Not when you get, like we're in an environment right now, like we just did a bond issuance, we get 1.75%.
Right.
Why we want to pay that? I'm sure we'll never pay that off early.
You don't
why
know.
would we pay that
Do
off
it
early?
for 30 years instead of 40 years. If you still get the same interest rate, it costs you less.
End of the day, we don't want to take that, we want all the tools in the toolbox, including 40-year notes, if that's a tool.
Well, I'm sort of at a loss as to, I'm assuming then that, with what, is the council pretty much in favor of what Lindsay Rader is recommending and Mr. Wilbur is recommending on 312, 313?
Yes, and I liked your first one the first one you read, which is
The first one about
the two,
being able to reallocate bond among other projects. Yeah. Which you do anyway, but it's a more complicated process than,
No, I think we all were in agreement on that, but then the second part of that, you had two options.
the
The first one you read was the better
Right.
one. At least I felt.
that's what I think. I like that language better.
I'm fine with that.
And she made one other recommendation for a new section F in 313, borrowing authorization. I'll just read it. It's one sentence. Any borrowing to finance capital projects must be authorized by an existing law of the General Assembly of Maryland or by a law of the council adopted in accordance with this charter, as the same may be amended. I think that's where we are. It's stating the obvious, I'll say.
I'm okay with moving forward with the recommendations from Lindsay Rader. Everybody else, do we have any objections?
I'm good.
I just don't agree with the 40 years. The rest of it's okay. So, I think I'm outnumbered.
If we could, Mr. Wilbur and Mr. Dunn, for 1 second, take a recess from this work session. Mrs. Hurley has brought it to my attention that we do have a letter of support. And for a minute, I thought that everyone over here was unbelievably interested in the charter amendments. Yeah. So if we could, if you don't mind, I'd like to move on to one more item, and then we'll get back to you. You can stay right where you are.